Chapter 4. After Ellie had arrived at school, breathless and a little shaken, her day began to settle into a more familiar routine. At least, it might have to anyone watching her. Within her mind, she was full of worry. Things had taken a sour turn with her cloned brother. She had felt sorry for him and had been trying to help him, and he had thanked her by threatening her and shoving her around. Now she kept going through things in her mind. She wanted to reveal all of the secrets to everyone, but who could I tell? She kept questioning. The clone was right. Mum and Dad won't believe me. No adults would. The only ones who would believe me are those that are clones themselves, and what might they do to me? She kept coming to the same conclusion. She was going to have to rescue Duncan herself. She began desperately hoping that the fairy rake would appear again soon, hopefully that night. The day couldn't end fast enough for Ellie, and her lessons seemed to drag on forever. Each time she opened her bag to get a book or a pen out, she looked at the wand. She would touch it, still unsure whether to believe that it might have real magical power. A day earlier she wouldn't have believed it, but that was before she had seen goblins kidnap her brother and spent a night talking to a fairy. Now, anything was possible. She began to think about what her grandfather had said about the wand. Ellie had been there when her grandfather had given the wand to Duncan, exactly 3 years ago, on Duncan's 10th birthday. The old man had said that his grandfather had given it to him on his 10th birthday, many years before. Ellie wished she could go and talk to him. Maybe he would have believed her, but he had passed away almost 2 years earlier. Ellie could remember very little of what he had said about the wand. She remembered that he had said it had been passed down in the family, all the way from its first owner, Merlin. At the time, Ellie and Duncan thought he was making it up, but Rake had seemed to think it entirely believable, and seemed sure that Merlin had been a real person. She spent lunchtime with her best friend, Rose. "What's up with you today, Ellie?" Rose asked several times. Each time, Ellie was close to telling her everything, but she didn't have many friends and was worried about making her closest friend think she was insane. Her final lesson of the day was a science class with her favourite teacher, Mr. Lister. As she got her books out, she gave the wand a quick squeeze, reassuring herself that it was still safe. It surprised her to find that it felt warm, and Ellie imagined that it wanted to be held. She felt herself pulling it out of the bag, not wanting to let go of it. When she realised that she was holding it out in plain sight, she jerked it back under her desk. The sudden movement drew attention, and she instantly regretted it, hoping no one had noticed. Her hopes were in vain, as she discovered several people now looking at her, craning their necks to try and see what she was hiding under her desk. One of those looking was Mr. Lister. He asked in his usual friendly manner, "What's that you've got, Ellie? Is it something for show and tell?" Ellie initially felt panicked, that the wand would be confiscated and she might lose the small hope she had of helping to get her brother back. But then she thought that maybe she could use the situation to her advantage, perhaps find out something about the wand. She pulled the stick out from under the desk and held it out for Mr. Lister and the rest of the class to see clearly.
"Yes," she answered, improvising. "It's a family heirloom, but I don't really know much about it. I was hoping you might be able to tell me something, Mr. Lister."
"Oh, well, that's interesting. Let me take a look at it," said the teacher, holding his hand out towards her. Suddenly, Ellie became more reluctant, that feeling of the wand wanting to be held still affecting her. What if Mr. Lister feels it too? Would he keep it for himself? It was too late to back out. She passed the wand to the science teacher, watching his face intently as he took hold of it, as she tried to see if he felt anything. She was relieved when he took it as if it was just a stick. He held it up to his face, examining it closely. He then moved over to the window and looked at it a little more in the improved light. He made some mutterings as he did, but the only word Ellie caught was, "Interesting." "Well, Ellie, I think this will require a little research. We'll discuss it at the end of lesson," he told her, leaving her a little disappointed but still hopeful. Then he turned his attention to the entire class. "So class, today we'll be talking about—" Ellie stopped listening as Mr. Lister began the lesson, considering for the 100th time whether to tell her friends anything. Would they be any less likely to think me crazy? Seeing Rake again could not happen soon enough. The class dragged on, Ellie unable to concentrate on the science lesson, as her gaze stayed fixed on Mr. Lister. The teacher, between attending to pupils, would occasionally refer to his computer. He kept picking up the wand as he compared it against something on the screen, which was frustratingly out of Ellie's view. With just a few minutes of the lesson remaining, Mr. Lister picked up the wand and stood at the front of the class, as he did when he wanted their attention. As was his custom, he waited for silence. He was a popular teacher, and the class willingly went quiet. "Well, class, we'll take the last few minutes of the day to talk about Ellie's family heirloom," he said. "So, Ellie, what can you tell us about it?"
Not much.
Ellie began, unsure what to say.
My grandfather gave it to me.
She said, deciding that the fewer people who knew that it had actually been given to Duncan, the better.
He said it had been in the family for a very long time. I don't really know any more than that. I don't even know what sort of tree the stick comes from.
Mr. Lister smiled at her. "Well, Ellie, the first thing I can tell you is that it's not from a tree. It is a horn, or rather a tusk, from a narwhal, I believe. Not the full tusk, though. It appears to be the top part of a narwhal's tusk," the teacher revealed.
A tusk?
Asked Ellie, surprised. She had thought it was wood. "Yeah," he confirmed. "It is basically the top section of a giant tooth that grows from the front of a narwhal, which is a type of whale." "A tooth? A giant tooth? That's what makes it magic," Ellie thought excitedly, really starting to believe that it truly was a magical wand, maybe even once belonging to the legendary Merlin. Rake had told her that fairy dust was made from teeth, so it made sense that a magic wand would be too. The school bell rang, and the children hurriedly packed up their bags, looking expectantly to Mr. Lister as they waited for him to dismiss them. He handed the wand back to Ellie. "That's a very interesting item, Ellie. Look after it, and perhaps leave it at home in future. You've seemed very distracted today." Then, to the whole class, "See you all tomorrow." That triggered a rush of children as they flooded out of the door. Ellie moved more slowly, more carefully. She wasn't sure if she should rush home. Will the clone be there? She wanted to avoid her brother's clone if possible. She waved goodbye to her friends at the school gate. She had barely spoken to them all day, not sure what to say. They had asked if she was okay several times, and each time she had told them that she was fine. As she took a slow walk home, she began to regret it, wishing perhaps that she had gone home with one of her friends, maybe had dinner there. When she got home and opened the door, she was pleased to find that Duncan's shoes were not there, but then she realized that the clone wouldn't know where to put his shoes anyway, and began a wary exploration of the house. She found her mum in the kitchen and asked her if Duncan was home. Her mum told her that he wasn't yet. Ellie wanted to tell her mother everything, but knew that she would never believe her. Instead, she went upstairs and took out the wand, holding it, waiting to see if she would feel anything from it, like she thought she had earlier that day. Ellie wished she knew how to use the wand, but she didn't have the faintest idea. She didn't even know if she could. "Can just anyone do magic?" She began to examine the wand, the narwhal tusk as Mr. Lister had informed her, looking for any markings. An on button seemed too much to hope for. She found nothing. Ellie began trying to cast spells, without having a clue how to begin. She pointed the wand at things, imagining that lightning might shoot out of the end. She tried saying magic words as she did so.
Alakazam! Hocus pocus! Shazam! Lightning! Abracadabra!
None of it worked, and only served to bring her mother upstairs to investigate. "What's all the noise about up here? Everything okay?"
Yes, Mum, just playing,
Ellie answered, still holding the wand. Well, just be careful you don't hurt yourself with that old stick. You could poke an eye out. I should have thrown it out years ago," her mother commented, before mumbling a worried comment about Duncan not being home yet as she left the room. She called back to Ellie as she went downstairs, reminding her that her father would be home before long, and that she should come down for dinner soon after. Ellie went back to trying various attempts at magic. When the house's front door opened and someone entered, Ellie listened intently. She was pleased to discover that it was her father, home from work. Dinner was a quiet affair, with worried discussion from her mother, wondering where Duncan might have got to. Her father tried to make plausible excuses. "He's probably gone playing football and forgotten to call." Ellie kept quiet through dinner, and the first chance she got, she excused herself and dashed back to her room. She grabbed the wand from under her pillow, where she had placed it during dinner. She sat holding it, frustrated. She began to think about the fairy Rake, hoping he would come. He had used magic on her last night, and had seemed to find it very easy, even natural. She thought that he would be able to teach her to use the wand. She began to wonder what using magic might feel like. With that, she began to feel a warmth spreading through her body, and the wand once more felt like it belonged in her hand, like it wanted to be used. Suddenly, Ellie felt like she could do anything, that doing magic was easy, but she still had no idea how. and the feelings of certainty faded away, as did the warm feeling. The wand began to feel just like a stick again. Before long, Ellie was left more frustrated than ever, and already beginning to think that she might have imagined it all. Ellie kept practicing, but tiredness was catching up with her. She had not slept much the night before, and it was beginning to have an effect, but she was reluctant to go to sleep in case she missed the fairy returning. When her bedtime came, her father came up to say good night, while her mother stayed downstairs fretting over the still absent Duncan. Ellie brushed her teeth and put on some fresh clothes before climbing into bed. She lay awake, waiting for any sign of Rake. Finally, the clone came home. Mum was both relieved that her son was home, and angry at him for being home late without letting her know anything. The real Duncan would have let his parents know where he was going. Ellie heard her mother shout at the clone, "Just because you're a teenager now, it doesn't mean you can get away with this sort of stunt." She didn't hear the clone's response, if there was any. A couple of minutes later, she heard a stomping up the stairs as the clone was sent to bed. Ellie realized that her bedroom door was ajar, and was concerned that the clone might enter, maybe still feeling angry at her. She clutched the wand nervously as she wished the door was closed. Unexpectedly, the door moved, gently swinging to close the gap as a tingling sensation rippled down Ellie's arm. She held her breath as the clone shuffled past her bedroom, unsure of what had just happened. Looking down at her hand, she thought for a moment that she could see a faint glow coming from the wand. She blinked a few times and the glow seemed to disappear. She felt a little shocked. Did I just do magic? There had been no bolts of lightning, no stream of light or explosions of power. It had just been a tiny movement of the door. It could have just been a draft in the house, but it had felt like magic.